very exciting way, we are going to be sending to Armenia in July one of our science envoys.
Եվ շատ ուրախությամբ ուզում եմ նշել, որ հուլիսի մենք Հայաստան ենք գործողելու գիտության մեր տեսփանորդին.
This is somebody who is not in government, but is asked by the government to go and represent the university and his field of study, and he's going to be coming to Georgia and Armenia.
Այս անձը կառավարության ազնիչի համարվում, սակայն նա կառավարության կողմից ուղարկվում է, գործողվում է, որպեսզի ներկայացնի եւ այս ոլորտում աշխատանքներ իրականացնի եւ այցի շրջանակում նա լինելու է Վրաստանում եւ Հայաստանում.
Dr. Mark Person from Northwestern University.
Dr. Mark Person մասին է խոսքը Northwestern համալսարանից.
He's a very well regarded scientist who works in material science and in nanotechnology.
Եվ Չիկագոյի համալսարանից է շատայցի գիտնական է նանոտեխնոլոգիաների եւ բնագիտության ասպարեզում.
Turekian վերջին իրադարձությունների շփման ես քաղաքական հարաբերությունից ու գիտության տեսանկյունից ցույց տվեցին, որ գիտությունը եւ տեխնոլոգիաների զարգացումը անվտանգության կարևորագույն բաղադրիչներից են, որտեղ Հայաստանը փաստորեն լուրջ բազդող է.
Recent developments along the conflict line, and I'm not asking a political question. I'm just trying to make the point that science and technology are an important component to security.
Աշխարհում Հայաստանի լուրջ ներուժը այս ոլորտում, ինչպես կարելի է լուծել այս խնդիրները եւ հայ-ամերիկյան համագործակցությունը որքանով կարող է օգնել այս խնդիրների լուծմանը, առաջինը թե ռազմական տեսանկյունից.
And Armenia has gaps in this area, so how is it possible to have cooperation between Armenia and the United States to work on this specific aspect?
So thank you. That is actually a part of the Department of State. It's different from where I work. I work in the areas around science for innovation and entrepreneurship and economic growth.
Տեսքարտուղարությունում իմ աշխատանքի ուղղվածությունը գիտություն է, նորարարությունները, ձեռնարկատիրությունը.
And so one of the things that I try to work on, whether it's in Armenia or any other place that I visit, and I visit many places, is really trying to motivate young people in my country to work with the young people around the world to think about how science and technology and innovation and entrepreneurship, but also, and this is important, I think, because I'm a father of 2 young children, to think about how we can think about the role of science and technology and innovation like in making the world more sustainable over the long term, making our air cleaner, making our oceans cleaner, making our food more abundant. Because ultimately, I always start
Ես իմ աշխատանքի բերումով ես փորձում եմ այնպես անել, որպեսզի գիտնականները, նորարարները, ձեռներեցները, Միացյալ Նահանգներից եւ այլ վայրերից երիտասարդները նրանք միմյանց հետ աշխատելու հնարավորություններ ունենան եւ նաեւ ուշադրության կենտրոնում լինեն այն հարցերը, որոնք կարեւոր են բոլորի համար, փոխմարտության համար, սակայն ես կարևորում եմ լինելով երկու երեխաների հայր, կարևոր է որ նաեւ երիտասարդ գիտնականները, նորարարները, ձեռներեցները միասին աշխատեն այնպիսի հարցերի շուրջ, ինչպիսին է ասենք օդը մաքուր պահելը, օվկիանոսը մաքուր պահելը, երբ տանել այնպիսի հարցերի մասին, որոնք բոլորի համար կարևոր են.
For my children and for my many children, the world that we help shape today is the world that they will live in tomorrow. So around the environment and all the different issues.
Եվ աշխարհը, որ մենք այսօր կառուցում ենք, այն աշխարհն է, որտեղ ապրելու են մեր երեխաները եւ շրջակա միջավայրը, օրինակ հարցերը կարևոր են.
No, this visit was just set up over Georgia and then for Armenia. And Georgia for Similar Innovation Council work, and then Armenia, and then I'll go back to my schedule. It's very tight. A colleague of mine who's living in Georgia is actually going to Azerbaijan. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Turekian.
so, all right. So would folks move up closer? Thank you. Well, this is on, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Welcome to the American University of Armenia. I'm Randall Rhodes, Provost at AUA. Today we welcome Dr. Vaughan Turekian, the Science and Technology Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State. Dr. Turekian will discuss his science diplomacy career and the intersection of science and diplomacy. He advises on international environment, science, technology, and health matters affecting the foreign policy of the United States. Prior to becoming the Science and Technology Advisor, Dr. Turekian was Chief International Officer for the American Association for the Advancement of Science and Director of the Association's Center for Science Diplomacy. He also worked at the State Department as Special Assistant and Advisor to the Undersecretary for Global Affairs on issues related to sustainable development, climate change, environment, energy, science, technology, and health. But most noteworthy on his resume is that he was a visiting professor here at AUA in the year 2000, and he taught graduate courses in environmental sciences and atmospheric chemistry. After that, everything else is just shallow. So he has a PhD and MS in atmospheric chemistry from the University of Virginia and a Bachelor of Science in Geology and Earth Science from Yale. So today, Dr. Turekian will share how his American roots, mentors, and diverse interests in science and international affairs influence his career trajectory, and will share recommendations for students who want to become more engaged in innovation, entrepreneurship, and policy. Now, the audience is invited to submit questions in writing during the lecture. As you enter the hall, well, we also have students here. There they are. There's one on each side. Students have paper and pens. Our student ushers will collect and deliver the questions to the moderator. Here, our moderator, Dr. Arm Hajian, Dean of the College of Science and Engineering. And after the presentation is over, he will present the questions to Dr. Turekian. So we're anxious to hear your questions on fostering innovation across the realms of science and technology. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Turekian.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. It is really a great pleasure to be back here after 16 years. As Randall mentioned, I was here in 2000, and I remember and I really cherished my time as visiting in 2000 for the first time, and actually up until now, the only time. What I think I remember, and I don't think many people say this when they talk about a university, is I actually remember really well and very fondly going to the cafeteria. And I say that because growing up, I grew up with a grandmother and a great aunt that would make Armenian food. But after they passed away, there really was not a lot of Armenian food being made in my family. And so it was wonderful to get back here and actually run to the cafeteria during breaks and actually get some home-cooked Armenian food. It reminded me of home. For me, the name of this university, the American University of Armenia, is very personal. Because right now I am an American in Armenia. And when I go home, I'm a person of Armenian descent in America. I think this university brings together the best qualities of both cultures. And that was one of the reasons why I enjoyed my time here so much. It was summer of 2000. I remember it very, very well. But so much has changed in the last 16 years since I was here. I look at this building here with this wonderful auditorium and so many of the facilities, and that's changed. this university and campus has really grown. And this country has changed a lot too. And I've noticed it when I used to walk down, when I lived here, Marshall Bagramian Avenue, and walk down to the downtown every day. And just seeing how much has changed in the time in those 16 years in the downtown area is just remarkable. But what has not changed is my belief then and my belief now that the future of this wonderful country lies in the exceptional talent of its young people. I have seen this over the past few days during my visit here, when visiting the Armenian National Engineering Laboratory yesterday, and at the Yerevan Impact Hub that I visited right before coming here today. But my experience with innovation and creativity is actually more personal, more self-based. I saw it in stories I heard about my father's father, Vaughan, or Vaughan, as people would say, who came into America in the late 1800s to start a new life. He served his adopted country as a sergeant in World War I, returning to Europe as a doughboy. Later in life, as he faced the very tough conditions that came and debilitating symptoms of multiple sclerosis, he stayed optimistic and taught himself how to knit, keeping his hands and his mind sharp, even as his body failed him. I saw it watching my mother's father, Yanov, who as a young man responsible for his younger brothers as they started their life in their new country, opened a small business in a small grocery store in New York. Despite having little formal education, Charlie, the name he took when he arrived in America, always reminded his grandchildren, us, not to dwell on the past, but to focus on the future, to develop our brains because they cannot be taken away. These two amazing men, Vaughan and Charles, live in me today. I, Vaughan Charles Turekian, carry their two names and their history. But my greatest influence was another Armenian American, my father, Karl Karakin Turekian. He started his life as a poor boy in New York City during the Great Depression. He spoke only Armenian when he was raised, up until the age of 5. But he worked hard and assiduously under the watchful and often strict eye of my grandmother, Victoria Gulasarian, and became one of the most famous earth scientists in the world, a professor at Yale for 57 years, and a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. For me, the pursuit that I am achieving now as a science diplomacy, started with an early infatuation with air travel, with flying, the travel mode of choice for not only scientists, but of course diplomats. I saw this many times in my own father's life. My father's many trips were to far-off places and exotic places. None were more exotic to me at the time, given the geopolitics, as his 2 trips to the Soviet Union. First in 1966, before I was born, and again in 1971, the year I was born. My father was part of scientific expeditions to the USSR, as it was then known, first to attend the International Oceanographic Congress, and then to plan the Geochemical Ocean Sciences Section study. In later years, including just weeks before his death, he and I would discuss what it was like to be one of the few Americans with the opportunity to visit the USSR during the height of the Cold War. It was a fascinating exposure to the fact that science provided, and always does provide, a way to make connections between people, even in the midst of high-stakes political posturing. But I learned so many other lessons from my father that I keep with me today. I remember one of the great examples was when I was a little boy, probably about 6 years old. And my father brought me to a trip that he went to Caltech, California Institute of Technology in California, to meet one of his friends, his colleagues, Pat Patterson. For those who are in the geosciences, Pat Patterson is a titan, a larger-than-life figure, who was actually the person that really created understanding of the age of the Earth. He and my father, and I was a young boy, sat in Pat's office, and they started screaming at each other. They were yelling at each other at the top of their lungs. And for a young boy, this is strange, to watch your father getting very upset and yelling at somebody, and watching that person equally yell back at him. As we left, I was a little teary-eyed. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I was crying, and I was saying to my father, Daddy, why do you go visit this man if you hate him so much? And he turned to me and he said, "Oh, Pat, he's one of my best friends. He and I were arguing over whether or not you could use lead isotopes to date a certain geological structure. What that lesson taught me was that actually people can fight and people can argue. But as long as you focus on substance, it's all right. That many, many years later, when Pat passed away, my father wrote his obituary and said, "To my friend Pat, a great friend, a great colleague, and a great gladiator." I also have seen other times where I learned from my father. One of the most important ones was the statement that he said that life is not linear. My father would remind me that life cannot be planned all the time, and that opportunities come to those prepared. His favorite biblical quote was from Ecclesiastes, that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither the bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, but time and chance happen to them all. So it is a nonlinear path that I have taken to become the science advisor to the Secretary of State. I started out a career interested in science, having grown up around it. But I also realized that the world around me was a big place, and that even many of the things that I was studying as an atmospheric scientist were things that would affect not only the place that I was measuring my stuff, but that they had a history from where they started, and that the air would go someplace else after I measured it. In many ways, I felt the international endeavor of science was just like the international endeavor of life itself. And so I became interested in international relations, got my PhD in environmental chemistry, but continued to read and to study international relations and take classes so that someday, which is now, I could maybe come in and do work more at an international relations standpoint. It was a nonlinear path from somebody exposed and loving science to somebody exposed and loving the role that science can play in helping international relations. Finally, I learned from my father that transformational change requires challenging the orthodoxy. My father used to say to us, "My job is to knock down some idea that somebody has, but leave just enough for somebody else to knock down." What I learned from those experiences was that you can't just expect to have a situation where every single thing is expected, that you can't just always listen to the thing that somebody's telling you is the truth. Sometimes you have to be willing to knock down the orthodoxy. It is, in fact, a strange combination to be a scientist and a diplomat. And science diplomacy is not an obvious path. There are people in the science community that don't understand diplomacy. And there are many people in the diplomacy community that don't understand why you would need a scientist there. But in fact, over time, challenging that orthodoxy, beating it down over time, has led to real transformational change. In the Department of State where I serve as the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Secretary of State. I have a wonderful opportunity to do many things. One of the things I do is actually try to bring more scientists into the department. The Department of State, a foreign ministry, actually to this day, has approximately 300 PhD scientists, engineers, and medical doctors. It's not the same size as NASA, but a foreign ministry having that much technical talent is actually changing the orthodoxy that one would expect. But I also do many other things, and one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that over time, the role of Science Technology Advisor has changed the way that maybe we think about the important role that science can play in building relationships. Just 2 years ago, a colleague in my office was the first person from a foreign ministry, she herself is a scientist, a neuroscientist, was one of the first people from the foreign ministry to go visit Cuba. She went not to have political discussions with the other Ministry of Foreign Affairs representatives, but rather to have contacts and make connections with those people outside of the foreign ministry and to connect with the science ministries and the universities and the scientists. This was before President Obama changed officially the U.S. policy towards Cuba. 6 months after her visit, she was actually in a position to highlight the role that science cooperation could play in building the new relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. And to this day, and still today, many scientists and biomedical scientists continue to have active collaborations between the U.S. and Cuba. One of the other things that my office does, and that I run out of my office, which I'm really proud of and have discussed with many colleagues here during my visit, is that we work very hard to work across the diaspora communities, of which there are many in the United States that are interested in science and engineering, to help those science diaspora begin to develop best ways of engaging their countries of origin or their home countries. how can science diaspora better work with the scientists and innovators in their home countries to help build not only more cooperation, but more substantive work around science and innovation. It's something that I work on. The program is called NODES, Network of Diaspora in Engineering and Science. I also have a great passion, and we continue to work a lot to elevate within the leadership that the most important thing in any single community around innovation is diversity. Diversity of people and diversity of ideas, diversity of experiences. I noticed this in the innovation hubs that I went to today, that really it is bringing together people with different ideas and different backgrounds that leads to some of the greatest changes that one can have. Indeed, the other thing that is so obvious to me is, and I've seen this through my life, and I try to do more and more of this when I advise senior people in our government, is that really we are living in an age when science is truly a global enterprise. And I will say that from my own standpoint, I was not only an advocate for this, I'm a great beneficiary of this. And it has to do with my son, Chip, Charles, named after Charlie, and my middle name, Charles. Chip was born with a heart defect called transposition of the great arteries. And for those of you that have any heart surgery background, you know the transposition of the great arteries is when the two major arteries to one's heart are switched. So rather than being a pink baby when he was born, our son Chip was a blue baby. He did not have didn't have any oxygen reaching his body. Chip is fine now. He is a healthy 3-year-old boy. And I know that he's a healthy 3-year-old boy because I get emails from my wife and texts from my wife saying, your son Chip is climbing up another counter. Your son Chip is causing all sorts of problems right now. So that is a normal 3-year-old boy just being mischievous. But when he was born in Washington, D.C., Chip's heart condition was immediately diagnosed by a pediatrician who had actually been born in Iran, done her training in Scotland, and moved to the United States for her residency. From there, Chip was transported to one of the great hospitals in the United States, Washington Children's Hospital, where it was nurses from around the world, including the Philippines and South America, who watched over him while we waited for a surgeon who was born in Australia, did his training in New Zealand, and then came to the United States to finally perform the surgery that would save and alter Chip's life. The heart condition itself was first researched by a Scottish pathologist in the 18th century. Before anybody knew how to fix the problem, he was a basic researcher who saw that children were dying by being blue. And he wanted to find out, how do you actually do something about this in a way that you can understand the problem first. This is basic research, understanding the problem even before you know the solutions. But the surgery that fixed Chip's arteries was invented by a Canadian doctor 2 centuries later. The first successful surgery was to test the procedure was performed by a Brazilian surgeon who was of Lebanese descent. Somewhere in this room or somewhere in this country, there is yet another scientist or engineer or medical doctor who's going to find a solution to something that we never thought we could find a solution to. And it is in this spirit of international collaboration and harnessing the tools of science and technology to solve so many of today's challenges, whether it is sustainability, managing our oceans, fighting infectious diseases, or improving food security. It is really the work of a global science enterprise that will be critical to interfacing with the policymaking community to build a more innovative and active society. In closing, I would just like to say to you that you should consider yourself all part of this global effort. When I go around the world, I see young and bright faces that are interested in solving problems. And so many of these problems are not just local problems, they're global problems. And bringing together the young people of the world with the old people of the world, with people in different parts of the world, will be really the only hope that we have to solve some of the great sustainability challenges that we have, not as only regions, countries, but in fact the world. I look forward to coming back sooner than 16 years and seeing how much this wonderful country and this wonderful city will change. Thank you so much. Look at this.
Oh, look at this. So please, as was mentioned, there's some papers going around. Volunteers on the sides, please take paper and submit your questions. We'll be happy to
Oh, so let me start. You're testing my ability to read. Okay. See, this is what happened. In 16 years ago, I didn't have to go like this. So what would you advise to a young student today in terms of choosing an academic major? You know, I know this sounds cliche, or you have to do, I think, two things. Really do something that you care about. If you hate what you are doing, you will do it poorly and you will not do it very long. Bless you. You have to do this, something in your heart that you really care about. I spoke about my son's heart being surgically fixed. I think emotionally sometimes our hearts require us to do the things that we love doing. And so in a major, that's it. The second thing, and I mean this when I say sort of thinking about the nonlinearity, there is no such thing as being confined to a single silo. The world we live in today is so complicated. So many of the issues cut across so many topics. You can be a biologist who's interested in engineering. You can be a physicist interested in art. If you look at some of the greatest innovations that have taken place, actually the greatest innovations that have taken place, whether it be in food or electronics, it hasn't been because there's been one type of person doing it. If you look at Apple, this phone right here is a combination of electrical engineers and physicists and designers and artists and business people, all coming together to create an ecosystem that is actually innovative. So I guess when I say what major do you want to pick something that you will be passionate about, pick something that you think you can be good at, but always keep your mind open and look for the thing that you don't expect to do with your own expertise. Oh, because, okay, there are more questions. It's like a fortune cookie here. Okay, a superb and successful example of U.S. science technology diplomacy has been Israel. What lessons can Armenia learn from this example? It's a wonderful question. And I think one of the things that we think about a lot is what I talked about earlier, the important role of connecting to diaspora. Some of my very good friends are part of the Israeli diaspora who have started high-tech companies. And they've gone back and forth, and they've connected. They've maintained strong connections. The second part of it is that, in fact, I think what you're seeing a lot of during my visit here is looking for the fact that you have to take advantage of the brains you have in the country here. As my grandfather said, people can't take away your brain. They can take away other things, but they can't take away your brain. And so I think one of the things that's amazing is watching an innovative spirit that's taking place. Whether it was in the Armenian National Engineering Lab that I saw yesterday, but also in the Innovation Hub I saw today, and the Tumo Center, which I'll see tomorrow. Already you're seeing that this small ecosystem is starting to create innovation. And that is in many ways the lesson that we learned from Israel, the Israeli story. We also learned that, in fact, the best cooperation can happen when there are rules and laws and regulations that are predictable between the two sides. A lot of the discussion between the U.S. and Israel around science, technology, and innovation is helping harmonize the rules and regulations in such a way that there can be more collaboration between the scientific communities, that there can be more innovation that has balance. I was just learning about some of the great discoveries. You know, if you look at, again, I show Apple, but if you look at Google and so many other companies, these are companies that don't necessarily create the innovations in-house. They've actually purchased them from other parts of the world. There's Waves, which is one of the very well-known mapping exercises, which actually came out of Israel. Well, that's because there was a close connection, and there was transparent ways of actually having mergers and acquisitions take place. It's part of the ecosystem that happens as a country develops over time. And that connection between the U.S. and Israel, the U.S. and many other countries, and many other countries with many other countries, comes because there's a belief that science and technology cooperation is important, that there's a connection to the diaspora communities, and that there are ways to learn from each other about rules and regulations that can promote these types of things. Sorry, I sort of feel bad. I'm reading and answering it. I can sort of read whatever I want here, right? Okay, let's see here. This one's a long one. Does our Armenian state try to assure that scientific breakthroughs are used to benefit people and not harm them, medical breakthroughs, technologies that can be used for weapons, or so one of the things that always happens when you think about science and technology is the pace of discovery and the pace of innovation is so fast. There are many different applications. There are many different ways that things happen. My own background in the area where I work in the State Department is in the economic side of the house. So I think very much about the issues of how can we bring more science and scientists and technology to deal with economics issues and innovation. There are other people that I think deal with the other issues, but one of the things we try to think about is how do we make policymakers aware of the fact that there's so many interesting discoveries happening in science right now that will affect and change the economy in ways that we haven't thought about it. And that's one of the areas where I work. Are there more? Sorry, to answer this one, what would you advise a young student today in terms of choosing? Yes, I did. I think my answer would be about the same. I don't know. How does science diplomacy deal with trade secrets? Sorry. Is it easier if I do this? I'm going to do this. Want me to do it? Okay. Does this work? Okay. Why don't I do this? Because I get out from behind there. How does science diplomacy deal with trade secrets or weapons technology across borders? So again, my focal area is actually not dealing with issues of trade secrets or those issues. My issue is dealing with the question of how do we promote science cooperation? Now, obviously, one of the things is one of the big differences that happens, and it's interesting watching this as it takes place in the science community, and it's not actually in government, it's other places. The closer something comes to commercialization, the more businesses are careful about how much they share. But really, one of the goals of government is to increase science collaboration in a way that you increase the knowledge that's out there. Because it is actually the ether of knowledge. Somebody said they saw did you say Tesla today? So Tesla, who here's ever seen a Tesla car? Anyone? Who's seen it on like TV or I look at this thing, I look at it and I think, wow, I'd love to have a Tesla. My wife looks at me and goes, yeah. She says, no, we need to make sure our children have food and clothes. And it's okay. But a Tesla is an example of what happens when you build a basic research environment. So think about the name Tesla. If you ask most young people, actually maybe even others, they think that a Tesla is just a car or just something that Elon Musk came up with. But Tesla was actually a man who created, from basic research, the fundamental principles that help us understand how to apply it to economy. And I think this is true with so many of the things that we think about in science and innovation, is that you actually need the underpinning of basic research and how you work with other countries to think about basic research to get that next innovation is actually very important. Finally, countries can work together, and I think this is really important, that as we try to meet things like the Sustainable Development Goals, every one of the Sustainable Development Goals, every single thing we're trying to achieve to make the world sustainable for the next generations, whether it's environment or food or atmosphere or women's empowerment or economic growth, all those have science or technology underpinning their solution. And so the more that you can actually get science cooperation in those areas, the more likely the positive outcome will be. Do I have? Okay. That's again my eyes. Sorry. I got more. Look at. Yeah, can you take the ones? I'm starting to read them over and over again. Yes. So. Wow, this is really bad. Maybe it's AUA. I didn't think I needed glasses. Rafi down here told me the other day when I was doing something and I was looking at something. He says, "You need glasses, my friend." AUA is opening a technology incubator this year. What advice would you give to its leadership? That's you, right?
We know that, so the AUA is opening a technology incubator. We have other people leading, but working very closely with many of the colleges and academic programs.
Technology incubators are just I love them. I visit them everywhere I go. It's one of my great things, and I think, I think it's almost sort of an oxymoron to give advice to an incubator, right? An incubator is meant to not have people give it advice. It's meant to just be this cluster of great ideas and people thinking and doing these amazing things. And so the most important advice I give is don't put too many rules and restrictions on it. Even this is a case why I always say you can't just think of science, and maybe this is the advice. Bring in people from all different disciplines. Look at the way that we think about an incubator. An incubator wasn't designed by an optimization engineer. It was designed by a designer, somebody who saw space and light and all those things to think about how people flow. So that's actually a really important thing. Also, bring in different fields. Always think about the diversity. And that's, I think, an important part about incubators. Okay. What do you have to say about those politicians who would who would cherry pick certain scientific advancements to promote their political agenda? I think one of the things that I have in my job is, again, to offer science, not to push science down anyone's throat. Because to be honest with you, there are so many things going on in the world that if I sit there and say, take this, people won't listen to me. One of the ways that I find is so important to engage with people, and I think the fact that a policymaker would even ask somebody for scientific advice is remarkable, because scientists have not always done the best job being communicators. And sometimes we've tried to separate ourselves from policy and policy advice. We've sort of viewed it as being something of, here I am, the scientist, here's my information, I'm walking away, and then get upset, why didn't you use all the information I gave you? One of the most important things about science policy is actually, and this is true with everything, I always say, my grandfather, who was, I think it's partly because he didn't speak a lot of English, but he always used to say, he never learned anything while talking. And I think that's something that scientists need to learn a little bit about when we try to give advice. Some of the best way to get advice or give advice is to actually listen to somebody and listen to what they think their problems are. And then hear it. And then ask them, is this the question you're asking about? Or here's sort of what I'm thinking about. Is this the right thing that you're thinking about? Is this your area that you're worried about? And so I think that it's not that they sometimes they cherry pick for their own pieces, but I think a lot of times it's because we need to do a better job of communicating. And we need to do a better job of communicating science with the public. I mean, this is the thing about it, democracies. Democracies require engaged publics. And if a public is not thinking critically, if a public is not thinking about all these different issues, it's very, very hard for that public to translate that in a democracy into the way that policymakers act. I don't know if that's... Does the U.S. have a priority? Okay. My goodness. Does the U.S. have a priority list? So what I'm realizing is some of you are writing in script, and some of you aren't. And I'll tell you, they don't teach script in school anymore? Does the U.S. have a priority list for scientific collaboration with Armenia? What are these priorities? Well, I know that my colleagues from USAID, maybe I didn't mention it earlier, have done a remarkable job working through Science and Technology Innovation Partnership to work with the government of Armenia around issues around groundwater. And you think about that as being such an important issue everywhere in the world, about how to ensure that groundwater and that policies around groundwater are data-driven, that they're driven by knowledge, not just by something that people don't have knowledge about. So that's an area of policy priority. We also really look forward and continue to be impressed with the fact that around ozone destruction and working together in the policy arena to really make sure that we have good international policies around reducing hydrofluorocarbons and working together to implement as quickly as possible the climate change agreement. There's a global climate change agreement where all the countries that were party to it have said that there are things they're going to do and how are we going to work together in that area. But as I mentioned before, and this is something that I think is important, is that we want to work with you and other countries on helping create more and more economic growth and innovation. And we can do this by making those connections that we have, by talking about some of our best practices and learning from you about innovative things that you've done. So that's that. Sorry. Let me see here. What could serve as a trigger driver for Armenia to concentrate more on R&D rather than outsourcing services? So, again, this is a little story about the United States. That in the 1800s, the United States was a developing country, not a developed country. By 1830, 1840, the United States was much more concentrating on trying to build its infrastructure than creating broad-based knowledge of a research and development enterprise. What happened a lot was that actually a bunch of scientists came together and saw that most of the major research and discovery was taking place in Europe and being translated or transferred to the United States, who then built roads and bridges, but was not contributing it much at the time to the global scientific community. It was not top down. The United States didn't come in and say, now we will do this. What happened was a bunch of scientists came together and they formed a community and they formed an association. An association called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I mean, you think about all those words. American, it was an association of people to advance science. And their whole goal was to work together and to try to elevate the issues of the importance of science and technology, and science, really, basic science and basic research, as critical to the United States as it was moving to the second half of the 19th century. And over time, the U.S. has worked in the science community to highlight that even though entrepreneurship and technology and discovery are important here, you can't forget that it's important to invest in basic research, no matter what amount it is, here. And that's something that it's not always easy for a country to do. In my own country, there's a goal to try to get to 3% of our gross domestic product being invested in research. Now, we're a big country. 3% is a lot of money. But that number has not actually increased in the last many years. We haven't come closer to that number. We're about 2.7%. It's close, but it's not there. Gets to an earlier question about Israel. I think Israel invests about 5% of their GDP in research and development. Estonia, I think, is also very high up there. A lot of countries, big and small, but a lot of small countries have increased the amount of their budget that goes, not only their budget, their private sector and their government sector that goes to research and development. Sorry, and I don't know how much more. Priority. More? Is that it?
If there are any other questions, now is your chance.
The politicians one.
Eagerly await.
Sorry.
You might have already covered
I think, yeah, good. Thank you.
And if there are no further questions, from here. So yeah, if there are no further questions, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Turekian, for a very inspiring and insightful personal story, as well as advice, insights, and food for thought for all of us. I see a lot of our students and faculty and guests here, so different people from different stakeholders and sectors of our academic community here. So once again, thank you very much and welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.